Welcome to the actual Genesis study or revision, sorry. I've come up with some questions from which we can learn some points and help us remember Genesis, but also carry those points that we learn from Genesis into the rest of the Bible. The verses you will find where you find the answers to the question is in the left-hand column. You see there. So first question. Give the two uses of the word day. When does one of those uses start? And give the relevance to Luke chapters 24, verses 21, and Mark chapter 16, verse 9, and Daniel chapter 8, verse 14. So the answer is this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 5. God called let's look at 1 verse 5. Right, Genesis 1 verse 5 says, and God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. So the light part is called one use, and the whole even the morning part is called day. So there's two uses of the word day. Now, to save me going backwards and forwards with the screen and taking up a lot of video time, I'm going to have you to just take my word for things. And I say you just look up the words there. Now, whilst we are here, I think we said in Luke's, anyway, okay, I'll let you look up the words yourself, the verses yourself. I'm just going to paraphrase what they say. Right. Give the relevance to Luke chapter 24, verse 21. I think that's where the Bible says that are they not 12 hours in a day? So each day has just 24 hours, especially when at the crucifixion time, the day he died and the day he rose. People say he died on a Friday and rose on a Sunday morning. He did not die on a Friday because you will not get the 3 days and 3 nights from 6 p.m. on a Friday, which is the rush to get him into the tomb before it got dark, to Sunday morning, even 6 a.m. in the morning. So let's look. Luke 24:21 says, but we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel, and besides all of this, today is the third day since these things were done. So notice the third day since these things were done. People think it's the third day. So it's not the third day as in where God says the evening morning was the first day, even on the third, the second day, even on the third day. So it wasn't not that third day. It's third day from a certain counting point. And it's since these events were done. The event was he had the Passover meal with his disciples, what was people call the Last Supper. He went into the garden. He rested in the garden. He was tried and he was crucified, and everyone went home. So when he went home, that's the end of the events. That happened on a Wednesday evening. So the one day since would be the Thursday. Yeah. So it's so yes. So we do not count the day it happened. We count the since. Anyway, yes. So anyway, so as I said, you won't get this from going from Friday to Sunday. Next one, Mark chapter 16, verse 9. Mark chapter 16, verse 9, it says, if you use the King James's version, it says he died early, he rose. It says he rose early the first day of the week. Now, the first day of the week starts with at the evening. So all days end and start at the evening, just like a running track. There's one line where you end one lap and you start the new lap. So if sun sets at 6 p.m., then that's when the seventh day would end. And the first day would be 1 second after that seventh day's ended. In our terms, we call that Saturday evening. The seventh day is from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, say Saturday 6 p.m. So the biblical first day will start at 1 second past our Saturday 6 p.m. Yes, so the early part of the biblical first day would be our 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. Saturday evening. So that is, so he rose on a Saturday evening, not on a Sunday morning. They like to deceive you when you use the verse when Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw he was not there. He had already risen. That's not when he rose. Okay, and Daniel chapter 8, 14, remember that. In Daniel chapter 8, verse 14, and again, so if you use King James's version, because in some other Bibles, they have translated the word first day to Sunday. So people may get their understanding from a false translation. They'll put Sunday for first day rather than first day or early the first day. So even if they put early, they may put early Sunday morning rather than early the first day, for example, in some translations. Daniel 8:14 says, until 2,000 days before this prophecy of how long the tabernacle will be defiled for. And the Adventist Church has used the word, the English translation of days, and called it, thinking it's a normal day. Yes, and then it took 2,000 years, the prophecy of 2,300 years, using a day for year principle. The day for year principle is only twice in the Bible. One is when a prophet had to lie on his side for a certain amount of time, and I can't remember the other occasion off head. But of the thousands of times the word day is used, only in those two occasions is God uses it as relevantly to a day to represent a year principle. So we cannot take those two occasions and translate it to every time we see the word day, which is what the Adventists done. Secondly, a good Bible will show you the actual word day should actually be evenings and mornings. In the Hebrew, it's actually two words which says evening and mornings, not the actual word day, which is yom in Hebrew. And you can see the proper day, the 24-hour period part, is in Genesis, sorry, it's in the same Daniel chapter 8, verse 26, which says, and the vision of the evening and the morning, the same two Hebrew words you see in verse 14, even morning, which was told true, wherefore shut thou up this vision, for it shall be for many days. That is the 24-hour period, days, the young one. The evening and the morning, which is in the same verse 26, is the same two Hebrew words in the verse 14. And I say that is when the light part of the day is being used in that context, like we just see in Genesis, where the light part is called day. Now, in the system, God's system, they had a sacrifice, two sacrifices per day, one in the morning and one in the evening. That's yes, and they're supposed to be continually burnt sacrifices. Anyway, yes. So the actual Daniel 8:14 should read, "Unto 2,300 evenings and mornings shall the sanctuary be cleansed." That means until 2,300 sacrifices. If you're having two per day, one in the evening, one in the morning, yes, then in 10 days you'll have 20. In 1,000 days you'll have 2,000 sacrifices, and so on. So the 2,000 evening and mornings means 2,300 sacrifices. In literal days, you halve it, you get 1,150 days. Convert that to years, 3 and so years. And if you look at Jewish history, you see that's exactly the time when prophecy was fulfilled, with the Maccabees, who went and cleansed the temple of the desolation that was done and spoken of in verse 11. Anyway, okay, so that's a long answer to your chapter, question number 1. Question number 2, how many heavens and where are they? There are 3 heavens. We see this in Genesis chapter 1, verse 8 and verse 20, which is one, the Bible calls them firmaments. Firmament, heaven, is there. And it's the one where the first one is where the birds fly, the atmosphere where we call where the birds, airplanes fly. The second one you see in verse 14 and verse 17, verse 14 to 17, which where the planets are, the sun, the moon, and all the planets. Where spaceships go, but the airplanes can't go, the spaceships can go on that one. And then the third heaven, Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 2. So it's 3 heavens. This is important because when the Bible might say he was taken up to heaven, it doesn't mean he was actually taken, like he was taken up to the third heaven. It just means he was taken up in the air. But unless you notice 3 heavens, you think someone's taken up to heaven and there's people in heaven. There's no one in heaven. No human being has died and gone to heaven as yet. So how many heavens? So then that 1 and 8 cloud be the same heaven, if not 4. Right. Oh yes, in chapters 1 verse 8 and verse 17, it could be thought to be the same heaven, if not for chapter 2 verse 1, which says the heavens were completed. Right. So we know it's a plural. There's plural heavens, apart from, say, Paul talking about third heaven in 2 Corinthians 12:2. Third question: what is the real meaning of the word seasons, as we translate the English word seasons in Genesis chapter 1:14? The real meaning is moed, or the Hebrew word is moed. It really means appointed times. Next part of the question, and examples of where else do we see the alternative translations? Right, so it's in Leviticus chapter 23, verse 2, you see it's called feasts, and God says, these are my feasts. So he didn't say they're Jewish feasts or whatever, he said they're his feasts. Same word, moed. In Exodus chapter 9, verse 2, and in Numbers chapter 23, so Exodus chapter 9, 2, and 23, 15, she talks about set times there, and Numbers chapter 9, 2. But the one I'm going to bring your attention to as a highlight is Genesis chapters 18, verse 14, the birth, when Sarah gave birth, when God came and said, this time next year, basically at the appointed time next year, Sarah is going to give birth. And it's the same word Genesis 1:14 has as seasons, and Leviticus 23 has as feast. So it's an appointed time set by God. Question 4. When was the first blessing given? The first blessing was given in Genesis chapter 1, verse 22. The beast that he created, God blessed them and told them to be fruitful and multiply. Before he did that, he told Adam to be fruitful and multiply. Question 5. Did all humans come from Adam and Eve? No, as is generally thought. If you read, Genesis chapter 1:25, you will get it saying, I'm going to paraphrase until I find it. When God said, let us make man in our image, and then it goes on to say, male and female created he them. Now, 127. Okay, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all earth, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And we see here the word created, which is, bear that in mind later on. The same way in verse 1, verse 121, and God created great whales. So the things in chapter 1 were created, which we're going to make a point of that later on. If you also go to Genesis chapter 5, verse 2, we are going to see it says, it's going to be same reference to chapter 1:27. Male and female created he them and blessed them and called their name Adam in the day when they were created. So their name, the human race, them were called Adam. Now, after that in Genesis chapter 2, God created the individual Adam, and he took someone from his ribs, a woman, the ribs from him made Eve. Now, we know it's a different creation because when he makes Adam, let's say in Genesis chapter 2, verse 19, it reads, and out of the ground, Yahweh God formed every beast of the field. So where's the beasts in Genesis chapter 1 were created, these ones were formed. And we should see the same word for Adam, where we should know God took some earth and he formed Adam out of that earth. And the same with Eve. Oh, yes. If you go to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, it says, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and he breathed into his nostrils and the breath of life. So the breath of life, and the man became a living soul. So Adam was formed as the individual. Adam, the human race, were created, as we saw, two different Hebrew words. Was going to make another point. Oh yes, common Christianity will tell you that Genesis chapter 1 is an overview, and then Genesis chapter 2 is a kind of intricate or kind of breakdown of the same event. No, it's two different events. You can either agree or disagree, but the one crucial point to know that one group of people were created, Genesis chapter 1 and 5:2, and the other person, Adam, was formed out of something else. Next question. Number 6, I think I am. Right, now, yes, and the reason it's important to know the more people were created, not everyone came from Adam and Eve, is otherwise you think that God allowed incest, where either Adam and Eve's children had, let's say Cain and Abel, had sex with Eve to make more humans, or the children had sex with each other to multiply. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He doesn't change, and so forth. So he doesn't allow something in Genesis chapter 1, say incest, and then outlaws it later on in the Bible when he tells his laws to Israel. So it's very important that we grasp, there's no incest with God. He doesn't break his own laws. Okay, so I think that covers that thing. Okay, the Genesis chapter, question number 6. What part of the week did God bless? That is Genesis chapter 2, verse 3. It said, and God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in that, and so forth. So that's it. Now he ceased. When people think he rested, God didn't get tired. God ceased from his work. Everything's finished. Nothing else to do. So he didn't rest because he done start work all over again the next day. He had finished. He ceased from his jobs. Question 7. How did the vegetation get water to grow? Answers in Genesis chapter 2, verse 6, where it says, but there went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. Question 8. What is a soul? Our bodies are the soul. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 7, which I just read out, said God breathed into his nostrils and the man became a living soul. And later on, when we come to days of Noah, he says, talks about 8 souls being saved, 8 human beings. Question number 9. To whom does the name Adam refer? I just gave you 2, one for the human race and one for individual Adam. Now, whilst I'm on, I think there's another question coming up. We can see if that makes it. Where was Adam created? I'll give you the answer now, in case there's not a question on it. Adam was not created in the garden. Adam was created outside the garden with the other, and then he was put into the Garden of Eden. And with these special animals, these animals were created. So his animals were formed, whereas the ones in Genesis chapter 1 were created. And so this is a special place for special people, yes, special things. When the man sinned, Adam and Eve sinned, he took him out of God and put him back from whence he was taken. If Adam was to be in the garden, was the only man, God could just made him in the garden and created him, formed him in the garden in the first place. Okay, I won't go into the Hebrew, but the word man and men is the same Hebrew word. So sometimes you see man and men in English, you wouldn't know it's the same Hebrew word. Species, mankind, and I say refer to Genesis chapter 6, verse 20. We see the word, it has the word as men, whereas in some places has the same Hebrew word as man. Question number 10. Adam named the species. The word Adam has a little association with the word men and man, but again, we won't go into the Hebrew language there. The name of the species, he came out red, and this is relevant to Esau, because we're going to see Esau comes out red. So Adam is from the earth, he came from the earth. So it's not the earth is black. As people say, oh, see, Adam was black, or people no, it's red, not black. Question 11. What is the difference between how the two Adams and sets of creatures came about? I've already covered that. Some were created, and there's the Hebrew identification word there, H1254, and the ones formed is H3335. Question 11. What is the difference between how the two Adams and sets of creatures? Oh, sorry, that's one I'm on to. Question 12. Is there a difference in Hebrew word for woman, wife, or concubine? No. If you go to Genesis chapters, let me see if I can show you this one. Genesis chapters 23, 2:23 and 2:24. Let's have a look. Genesis 2:23 and 2:24. Okay, so Genesis chapter 2, verse 23 and 24. All right, 22. Woman. You see, the word for woman is as an indication of H802, and 24, and we see it again there, woman, H802, and then 24, we should see the word wife. There's a word wife there, H802, same thing, same person. So it's not a different English word, because that gives you different theology. You also see concubine later on in, I think, Book of Judges will have the same word or connection, because the difference between a woman stroke wife and a concubine is the first woman is given the identification of a wife, and this other ones are called concubines, so you can distinguish which one came first, the primary one, and which ones came after. Okay, let's go back to our questions. I think I should be on question number 13. All right, question number 13. How did the serpent convince Eve to eat of the fruit? The answer is chapter 3, verse 6. He actually made her see it a different way. Yes, so Eve knew the law, let's say, and she corrected Satan at first when he thought she didn't know much. But when he saw she knew the law, he actually made her interpret or see it a different way. It reads, and when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was pleasant, and so the devil made Eve think that surely die didn't mean surely die. Yes, and on top of that, he gave her a reward. It's always the things of the devil, gives reward. So his reward, he told her that they'll be like gods to know good and evil. Good, be like gods to know good and evil. And the same thing he did with Yeshua in the Garden of Eden, when he took him up to try and tempt him. Some people call it, it's to say Yeshua was tempted. No, he wasn't tempted. The devil tried to tempt him. Right. So let's say, so that's why it's very important that we do not interpret the Bible. We follow it and understand it fully. And if we don't understand it fully, we just keep studying until we get the right understanding. Okay, next question. So I think is number 14. How did the serpent convince Eve to fear? Number 14. What was the reward? He said, yeah, as I said, to be like God, to know good and evil, and so forth. Question number 15. What was the devil's, Adam's, and Eve's punishments? We see this in Genesis chapter 3, verses 14 to 19. The devil, he will work on his belly. You can read it. Adam, he will have to till the earth, and Eve's was chapter 18. It says, and unto the woman he said, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception in sorrow, and thy sorrow and thy conception. In sorrow thou shalt bring forth children, and thy desire shall be unto thy husband, and he shall rule over thee. And I have a little side note here, I'm not sure it's right, Luke chapter 17, verse 10, and Matthew 8, verse 9. I'm not sure what those say, but I've just got a note for myself there. So that's the answer to your question. 415. Question 16. How and where was Adam formed? We see this in Genesis chapter 2, verse 8, which says, and the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. So in other words, he didn't come from there. And in 3:23, it says, therefore Yahweh God sent him forth from the Garden of Eden to till the ground from whence he was taken. Question 17. What precaution did God put in place to keep Adam and Eve out of Eden? It was the cherubims. We see that in verse 24. Question 18. What law can we assume Cain and Abel were keeping? This would be the law of first fruits, because in Genesis chapter, let me read it, chapter 4, 3 and 4. In the process of time, it came to pass that Cain brought of the fruit of the ground an offering unto Yahweh. And Abel he also brought the firstlings of his flock out of the fat thereof. And the Lord had respect unto Abel. And so the word first is mentioned there. So to probably bring the first things, you're going to see law of first fruits later on in the Bible. What were law? Okay. And the reason I use the word assumed, because it doesn't clearly state, but we can assume that. Question 19. What did God say to Cain about if he did well? If he did well in 4:7, it'd be accepted. If thou doest well, shall thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door, and unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him. So you have to rule over these temptations of evil, sin in your mind, in your life. But see, God from the beginning made it about works. With Adam and Eve, it was about their works. Straight away, Cain and Abel, it's about their works. But yet Christianity tells you it's not about your works. Nothing you can do can gain you salvation, and blah, blah, blah. God clearly told Cain, if he does well, he's accepted. If he doesn't do well, he's not accepted. Or he's committing sin. Sin lies at his door. Question 20. Why did God mark Cain? The answer is in chapter 4, verse 15. And this is where the other people came, with the there and the them, in Genesis chapter 1, 27, 5:2. And he said, the Lord said unto him, therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain, lest any finding him should kill him. So it's just so no one will kill him. What happened to Enoch? In chapter 5, verse 23, you see Enoch was taken. I read verse 21. Enoch lived 60 and 500 years and begat Methuselah, and Enoch walked with God. We're going to see this the same with Noah. Yeah, and he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 360 and 5 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And that's the end of the information we are given. Where am I? Where am I up to? Sorry, give me a minute. What had you not disturb one? Anyway, right. Why did God mark Cain? What happened to Enoch? 22. About how long did people live between Genesis chapter 1 and 6? I just read it there. Under 1,000 years. The age of children conception, we just read a little bit, a few hundred years where they conceived. Sometimes it was 70. Age range set for humans. So you see this in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, and look at that. Question 23. Why did God bring the flood? In 6:5, because And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And then we go into verse 12, where it says, and God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. So God had a way, and people departed from it. Same with Adam and Eve. Don't do something. They went against his way. They got punished. Cain went against his way, got punished, and Noah and the flood, or everyone there. We're up to, why did God, right? Question 24. Who found grace in God's eyes, was a just man, perfect in his generations, and walked with God? Enoch. You see the answer in chapter 6, verse 9. 25. God said, okay, in chapter 7:1, God said Noah was righteous. Where in the gospel can we find how to be righteous? Okay, so let me first read you Genesis chapter verse 1. And the Lord said unto Noah, come thou and all thy house into the ark. So where am I supposed to be? Did I say 6:9? 6:9. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generation, and Noah walked with God. And if we go to Luke chapter 7, I'll let you look it up anyway. Luke chapter 7, verse 6 should say, sorry, Luke chapter 1, verse 6 says, they were both righteous, talking about John the Baptist's parents, they're both righteous before God, walking in all the commandments blameless. But you look up the actual wording of that. But that's how you become righteous. Well, Luke chapter 1, verse 6. Chapter 20, verse number 25. Okay, sorry, 26. How many of each animals were taken into the ark, and why? 7 verse 2. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and the beasts that are not clean, 2 by 2. The reason why you take the clean ones by 7, because it's going to be sacrifices, and so you need more of them. If you just had one pair and then you do a sacrifice, that's the end of the species. So that one. Question 27. Which humans went into the ark? That's in verse 13. In the self same day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth. Basically, and it says his 3 wives, basically 8 of them. Noah, his wife, and his 3 sons and 3 wives. Now, we do not know the colors of these people, so we cannot start giving the colors to the generations thereafter, as some theology has sprung out. Whatever people were before, they all died out. We don't know what color Noah was, because we don't know his parents' color. To know the color of a person, you need to know the color of their appearance. And we don't know Noah's color, Noah's parents' color, his sons, nothing. So I don't know why people start with color in the Bible. Question 20. Oh yeah, how long were they in the ark? They were in the ark for just a year. I'll let you look it up. It tells you in 7:11. Actually, I suppose I can read it out to you. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And basically, and that's where, and then 13, in the same day entered Noah and Shem, blah, blah, blah. So note, he was 600 year, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month. He went in 600 a month or so. And he came out in chapter 8, verse 13. And that says, and it came to pass in the 601st year, in the 1st month, the 1st day of the month, the waters were dried up, and basically that's when he came out. You know, he didn't come out on his own accord. He waited till God told him to come out. Even though he saw the bird didn't come back, he saw the ground was dry, he still waited for God to tell him to come out. Now, God cannot control when he went, how old he was when he went in, because that depends on when his parents had the sex and he was born. So there's no control. But God controlled when he came out in the new beginning. It was the beginning of the year, the first month, the first day. We're going to see a pattern with this, with Israel, when they come out of Egypt in the first month and the 14th day of the month, and then when they raise up the tabernacle. So these are important times. We talk about appointed times in Genesis 1. Yeah, these are appointed times for God, new beginnings. 29, question 29. What type of offering did Noah do when he came out the ark? We see the answer to this in chapter 8, verse 20. It reads, and Noah built an altar unto the Lord and took every clean beast and of every clean fowl and offered burnt offerings onto the altar. And we're going to see Abraham doing the same thing. We're going to see the same in Leviticus chapter 4, verse 11, I think. Yes, burnt offerings. So the same way Cain and Abel did first fruits, we've now seen another example of God's law existing before Israel with burnt offerings. Question number 30. What commandment did God give Noah that he also gave in Genesis chapter 1? Well, basically to be fruitful and multiply. Yes, you look at chapter 1:22, we talk about who got the first blessings, the creatures, and chapter 9, verse 1. Question 31. What limitation did God put on Noah on what to eat and not eat? We see this in Genesis chapter 9, verse 4, which is, I'll read it for you. But the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall ye not eat. And we're also going to see this in Leviticus chapter 17, verse 10, and of course, of the places God commands not to eat food with blood in it. Again, another example of the law existing before it was given to Israel. Question 32. What is the first covenant God made with the world? This is same as Noah chapter 12, and it reads, and God said, this is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. And we see the rainbow, basically, if you were to carry on reading. Question 33. What sin did Ham commit that got his son Canaan cursed? This is chapter 9, verse 22 and 25. Basically, we cover the nakedness of his father or grandfather, and we'll see the same thing about in God's laws about covering the nakedness of your parents. Question 34. What is a better translation for Gentiles? I'm going to take you, this is another important one. I'll show you like the word woman and wife. Gentiles really means nations. So let's take you to Genesis chapter 10, verse 5 and 10, verse 20. Genesis 10, 5 and 10, 20. Genesis 10, 5 and 20. Right, Genesis chapter 10, verse 5. Right, so we see the word Gentiles has the same Hebrew word as here called as identification of 1471, translated as Gentiles. And then verse 20. Verse 20, nations, same Hebrew word. So just like English, they're giving it two different English words, Gentiles and nations, but really means nations. And this is a very important point that you grasp here. So when in the New Testament, it talks about Gentiles, it's talking about Jews or Israelites, to be precise, in those other countries, other nations. So when Paul says to one group of Jews, Judea, there because you reject my message about your Messiah, I'm going to go to the Gentiles. Christians are taught he went on to the natural Gentiles, inhabitants of those countries. No, he went on to the scattered 10 tribes of Israel living in those nations. And if you follow it, you see he went into the synagogues and he spoke to Jews or Israelites. Yeah, and he would tell he's talking to them because he'll tell them things only they know about your Abraham, about your forefathers. It is written, yes, things that they have some recollection on. Now, in those same synagogues, there'll be some Greeks. Another word for Greeks is Gentiles. But the reason that the Bible wants you to differentiate between the let's say the Israelites in those Gentile nations and the natural Gentiles in those nations is it calls one Gentiles, some to the Israelites, and it calls other Greeks. Anyway, yeah, my point is, but just notice it's not Gentiles just means different country. So let me give you an example. Let's say you are part of a culture of, I'm just going to use a African country, yeah, for a minute, yeah. And let's okay, let's say America, just Americans, yeah. So you live in America and you're doing something for the American group or the Spanish. Let's say the Spanish people live in America, yes. And you also have a message about to them, to the Spanish people, about their history, their ancestry, and whatever. And you go to England, France, Germany, yes, to speak in the foreign nation, the Gentile nations, but you're only going to go to speak to the Spanish people. So you're going to go to the Spanish communities and speak to them. So although in America you say, therefore I'm going to go to the Gentiles, the foreign lands, you're not going to go to the natural people of those foreign lands. You're going to go to the Spanish people. So that's the concept of the New Testament that Christians fail to understand. And they therefore think that they're on the new covenant, they don't have to keep the laws, and so on and so forth. Not true. Okay, so let's get back to our questions. Right, I think I should be on question 35. Right, so up to question 35. What is the story of Babel? Well, they tried to build a tower and so forth. So you've got to read whole chapter 11. And God confounded their language and scattered them, so forth. I'll just put that in as part of the story of Genesis. Question 36. How did Abraham get rich? Let me just read it for you. Chapter 12, verse 16. Basically, got it all from the Egypt. 12th question. Chapter 12, verse 16. So after he called Sarah, his wife, his sister, but she was a sister, she was half sister. 16 says, and he, being the Pharaoh, the prince is also a Pharaoh, entreated Abraham well for her sake, and he had sheep and oxen and asses and manservants and maidservants and she-servants and camels. Yes, so Pharaoh, they gave Abraham all this wealth. Question 37, why did Abraham and Lot separate after coming out of Egypt? In 13:6, because the land couldn't hold both of them. So that says, and Abraham passed through the land onto the place of Shechem, onto the plain of Mamre, and the Canaanite. Oh, sorry, I'm in chapter 12. I'm in chapter 12. I'm in chapter 13, sorry, 13:6. That says, and the land was not able to bear them, and that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. Question 38. What happened to Lot after he settled in Sodom, and how did Abraham hear about it? Verse 14, chapter 6. And the Horites in their mount, basically where he was living got invaded and he got captured and taken away. And in verse 14, 13, and there came one that had escaped and told Abraham the Hebrew, for he dwelt in the plain of Mamre, in the Amorite brother of Basically, he came and told Abraham. And note in verse 14, Abraham took his trained servants and went and rescued Lot. Question 39. Who is called the first Hebrew, and possibly why? I just gave you it was Abraham, called first Hebrew. Now, some concordance, especially mine, will give you the impression it has something to do with his ancestry. And the user is one of his forefathers called Eber in Genesis chapter 11, verse 14. But that cannot be so, because his ancestors had other children, offsprings, but yet they are not called Hebrew. It's only Abraham is called Hebrew. Yes, and that's because he crossed over in belief. Rather than worshiping the pagan gods of his fathers, he learned through Noah about the one and only true God, and he crossed over in faith, you can say. So that's how he became a Hebrew and the father of the Hebrews. You shall find Isaac and Joseph are called Hebrews. You won't find Ishmael and Esau called Hebrews. Question 40. How did Lot escape? And I just read it. Abraham took his 3 tradesmen and did it. You see that in chapter 14, verse 14 is your answer. Question 41. What is the name of the first priest mentioned? In 14:18, we see it says Melchizedek. Question 42. And you know this Melchizedek is going to be connected to in the book of Hebrews. What did Abraham do for it to be counted to him as righteousness? Chapter 15, verse 6, it says, and he believed Yahweh, and he counted it to him for righteousness. So when God told him to do something, he did it without getting the physical evidence first. Question 43, what is the difference between what is different between what Abraham did with the animals for sacrifice, but not the birds? We see in 15:10, I'll read it out to you. And he, Abraham that is, took unto him all these and divided them in the midst and laid each piece one against another, but the birds divided he not. And you see this again in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 17, when, again, making the sacrifice, they did certain things with the other animals, but not with the birds. Again, another example that the laws existed way before Egypt. Question 44, how long did God tell Abraham his descendants will be in a land that is not theirs, and how many generations? 15, verse 13, and he said unto Abraham, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. But that's a round up number to the nearest 100. When we come to Exodus, all the place we see is actually 430 years. Next question. How long did God tell Abraham the generation? I've done that one. Question 45. At what time of day was Abraham's sacrifice consumed? Again, chapter 15, verse 17. And it came to pass that when the sun went down and it was dark, it says the evening time. And I mentioned this in the introduction when I talked about the word day. The introduction to study, go back and look at that, right? So, and other things, yeah. So God does things that's a pattern. So it's the evening time, and also in Daniel 8:14. If you look at the previous introduction to these questions, it talks about Daniel 8:14, explained there. Question 46. What is the name of Abraham's first son and his son's mother? We see this in chapter 16, verse 15. And that says, 16:15, and Hagar bare Abraham a son, and Abraham called his son's name, which Hagar bare Ishmael. Question 47. What was the condition placed on Abraham for him to get the promise of God's covenant? And I've got here type of relationship that was required. So the condition was in 17 verse 1, God says, and when Abraham was 90 years old and 99, Yahweh appeared unto Abraham and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Here's the condition. Walk before me and be thou perfect. And as a result, verse 2, and I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thy seed. So firstly, Abraham had to do something. People say you can't earn, Christians taught you can't earn. Abraham, in a sense, had to earn it. He had to do first. We notice Noah before walked with God. Enoch walked with God. Noah said we have been perfect in his generation. That is the criteria we have picked up. We're only 17 chapters into the Bible. And so the criteria is going to go all the way through the Bible. If you don't get it now, because you're following Christian theology, or you won't believe when people try and tell you otherwise. So where am I? Question 46. What's the condition of the? Okay. So when people today say it's all about your relationship, the word relationship is actually not in the Bible. But if you want a type of relationship, this is the type of relationship that God requires. Walk before him and be perfect. And again, people say, oh, no one can be perfect. Yes, we can be perfect. God says, be holy because I'm holy, be perfect because I'm perfect. Yeah. And he says it there, he clearly says, God does not give us things we cannot do. And it's very easy to be perfect. You just follow the laws. Now, there is a thing in the New Testament where a lawyer comes to Yeshua and says, what do I need? I think he says, good master, what good thing shall I do to get eternal life? And Yeshua answered, why call me good? There's none good but God or the Father in heaven, whatever. To keep basically on said, to enter life, keep the commandments. One question, one answer. The questioner could have walked away and got his answer. But he said to Yeshua, all of these things I have done. And he asked a second question, a different question that people don't understand. It's a different question. What else do I lack? And so that's the second question. Yes. Nothing to do with enter into salvation. That was given in the first answer. Keep the commandments. He said, and Yeshua said, if you want to be perfect, then I can't remember, it's basically sell everything and follow me, or something worse to that effect. Yeah. So that's the picture. You've gone beyond keeping the laws of God. So in other words, even in any country, you can always keep the laws of God. You don't the laws of the land. You don't park on top of your line. You don't kill anyone. You don't steal. You don't do anything to put you in prison or become before a policeman or the court. But there are people who go beyond that. They do good charitable works. They will help someone and donate and all these kind of things. And some of those, they will get a special recognition. In England, it'd be an MBE or CBE. In America or something, you might get some honorary something or the other. Yes, they have gone beyond what was needed to be a law keeper. Yes, so that's the difference between perfection and the criteria to get into heaven or eternal life. Question 48, what is the sign of the covenant and how long was it to last? That comes in chapter 17, verse 8, 13, and 19. Let's read that. 8, 39. Again, talking to Abraham. And I will give thee and thy seed after thee the land wherein thou art a stranger, and all the land of Canaan foreigner. So I've talked about this in the introduction to this question. So if you can go back and look at that. Verse 13 says, he that is born in thy house and he that is brought with thy money must needs be circumcised, and my covenant shall be in your flesh. And verse 19, then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed and said in his heart, shall a child be born unto that is 100 years? So it's 19, reading around 19. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a seed, and indeed shall call his name Isaac. Hopefully, anyway, there's your answer. Hopefully I've identified the right verse for you. 17, 8, 13, and 19 I've got here. The sign of the covenant. The sign was circumcision, and it was to last forever for all these generations. Question 49. How many people were first circumcised, and was it the sign of God's full covenant to Abraham. Where am I up to? 49, I think. Was it the son of God's full covenant to Abraham? No, because part of, so I say, read it, chapter 17, verse 2. How many people are circumcised? Well, is him, Ishmael, and his 318 servants? Is the answer to the first part of the question. And was it the sign of God's full covenant? No. Part of the covenant was that Sarah will get a child. And I says it didn't include Ishmael because Ishmael was already born and he was about 13 years old, and hence his lineage, which is Ishmael's lineage, is not part of the covenant, though he got circumcised also. This is the foundation of Paul's epistles. Who was to be circumcised? I say, if you see the introduction to this, where I gave a little chart and I went through the promises and the word seed and so forth. Question 51. When are we told God first appeared in human form? This is chapters 18, verses 2 and 9 and 17 and so forth. When three men, the Bible says, actually, let me read it for you. 18 verses 2. I read from verse 1. And Yahweh, well, it says here the Lord appeared, but anyway, and Yahweh appeared unto him in the plain of Mamre, and he sat, this is Abraham, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he's telling you what happened, but Abraham doesn't know this yet, I suppose. Verse 2, and he, Abraham, lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, three men stood by him, and when he saw them, he ran to meet them, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. If you look at the end of chapter 18, Abraham is bartering with one of these people who we know to be God, because he's trying to save Sodom and Gomorrah, if God can find 50, 40, and so on, righteous people. And in chapter 19, verse 1, it says, and there came two angels to Sodom at evening, and Lot sat at the gate. So that's how we know of these three people, one of them was God. So God appeared in human form. Yeshua wasn't the first, or coming in the shape of the Savior wasn't the first. Chapter 50, sorry, lesson 50, question 52. Why did God separate Abraham? Why did God separate Abraham for his covenant? Go to 18, chapter 18, verse 19. Read it. For I know that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of Yahweh to do justice and judgment, that Yahweh may bring upon Abraham that which he has spoken. So you notice the word that. Yes, God is presuming, or he knows that Abraham is going to meet the criteria. Yes, and we read one before, where God told him to be what before me and be perfect. Then I would. Then God said, then I would do. It's always a condition to God's things. And I think in Exodus, in the introduction, I referred you to Exodus chapter 20, verse 6, where it talks about God says, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. That's the criteria. It's not people, Christians are taught it is unconditional love. It is not. Verse 50, question 53, how many souls left Sodom with the two angels? Right, okay, remember that we read a soul is a person, so how many people? I put a soul in just to remind you that a person is a soul, basically one of the questions. And how many reached the destination? So we know Lot, his wife, and his two daughters left. That's four people, but only three of them left, the Lot and his two daughters, because the wife looked back. You can see the answer in 1916. Question 54. Why did the daughters make Lot drunk? In 1931, it wasn't for selfish pleasure reasons. I'll just read it to you. 1931. And the firstborn said unto the younger, our father is old, and there is not a man in the earth to come in unto us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that he may preserve seed of our father. So later we're going to see a law of God to keep the name of a man alive. We see in the story of Ruth and Boaz and Tamar later in Genesis. God doesn't want the name of a family, to die out. So they weren't doing it for lustful, selfish reasons. Question 55. How many times did Abraham say to a king that Sarah was his sister? Why was he lying? Does she, being his wife, violate God's law? The answer is in 12, 13, 20, verse 2 and 12, and so forth. So it's twice he said this. Does it violate the law? No, because he said that indeed she's my sister. She's the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother. No, she's not my direct sister. She's a half sister. So when we go to the laws, say in Leviticus chapter 18:11, let's read that. It has to be a direct sister. There's people, if I say you don't understand the law, you think the Bible is contradictory. Who am I looking for? 18:11. And that says, the nakedness of thy father's wife's daughter, begotten of thy father, she is thy sister. Thou shalt not uncover nakedness. So the nakedness of thy father's wife's daughter, begotten of thy father. Anyway, so if you read it, there has to come from the same mother and the same father. And we're going to see something like this with the story of Absalom in the New Testament, when Absalom raped one of his half sisters, and she said that if he had asked it properly of David, then he would have got the permission probably from David. Right, question 56. Why did Abraham send his wife Hagar? Why did Abraham send away his wife Hagar? Because of Sarah. Chapters 21, verses 9 and 10. Sarah thought she couldn't get children. She gave Hagar, her maid, to Abraham to wife. And then, but when the son was born, a bit of jealousy there. So let's read chapters 21, verses 9 and 10. And Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, which she had borne unto Abraham, mocking. Wherefore she said unto Abraham, cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be here with my son, even with Isaac. So Isaac was born by that time. Question 57. What was similar between Noah's and Abraham's offering? And I said is both did burnt offerings. And we see this in Leviticus chapter 1, verse 4. Chapter 58. Question 58. What did Abraham tell his servants he and Isaac were going to do, and how does what they did differ from today's use of the word worship? So we go to 22, verse 5. It says, and Abraham said unto his young men, abide or stay here with their asses, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship and come again to you. Now, they didn't go to sing and dance and all the things that people think worship is. They went to obey God. It's the only thing we see, because Abraham took the wood, the burnt offering, and so on, and laid it upon this. Yeah. So he went. Worship is to obey God. Praise is to praise his name and say you're good and you're mighty. So yeah. So we have praise and worship, but they're two separate things. Question 59. What did Isaac say to Abraham? So what did Isaac say to Abraham was lacking for the offering, and how the criteria? So 22:7. And Isaac spoke unto Abraham his father and said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said, behold, the fire and the wood. So behold the fire and the wood. I can see the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering? So the son knew the criteria. He didn't say where's the cow, where's the cat, where's the anything else. Yes, he knew it was a lamb. So the laws were passed on. He knew the law before given to Israel. All right. Question 60. Is Jehovah Jireh a name for God? No, it is not. Verse 14. And Abraham, this after he did didn't do sacrifice for God stopped him from killing his son. And Abraham called the name of that place the Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day in the mount of the Lord. Yeah? So the name of a place was called Jehovah Jireh. Some people use this as a name of God. That is not the name of God. God only has one name, and we should see this in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. However you want to pronounce it, the initiative is YHWH. Some say Jehovah, some say Yahweh, and so on. But that's his name. He may have many attributes, but only one name. Do not get confused. We have to call in the name of God. Later, we saw in Genesis, people called in the name of God. Question 61. Why did God choose to bless the nations via Abraham? Where we see in, say, 20, there's a reference there, 22:18 and 18:19. I've read some of them already because God knew Abraham was going to raise up his descendants, right? And Abraham obeyed God's laws and so on. We can see this later in 26, verse 5. Question 62. Where were contracts commonly made between the parties and what requirements? And you'll see at the gates of the city in front of witnesses. You can see Genesis 23, verse 10, and you see this with the story of Ruth, and also in Genesis chapter 34, verse 20, and Proverbs, the 31:23 with the, what's she called in Proverbs? The virtuous woman, her husband. He was an elder and he sat at the gates. Question 63. What arrangements did Abraham make for a wife for Isaac? Well, he sent a servant away to get his wife for him. And we'll see in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 to 3, God said, do not take foreigners, do not take pagan wives to you, and you not marry them. And that's part of the problems, especially with Solomon, when Solomon married these pagan wives, and they caused his heart to go away from God. It wasn't a marriage if there was a problem, because Joseph married a priest, or so the daughter of a priest in Egypt, but the causing of in King Saul's case, they caused his heart to go away from God. I've got Deuteronomy chapter 7, 1 to 3 here. Note how did his servant find anyway, you read the story and you'll see that's where the answer is. Question 64. What time of day did the servant return and see Isaac? And what was Isaac doing? I said, you'll see it was the evening time of the day. I mentioned the word evening when this sacrifice was eaten up. One sacrifice we did talk about earlier on. And you'll see this in Daniel chapter 6, verse 10, and Psalms 55, verse 17. Daniel prayed 3 times a day. Psalms 55, 17 says, morning. I can't remember the 3 times, but especially the evening. Oh yes, when I was talking about the word day in the beginning, how many parts of a day? 2 parts: the day part and the evening and morning, and that's when the sacrifices were made and so forth. I've talked about that before. What time service did Isaac? So yes, Isaac was meditating in the evening, in the cool of the day. It says the cool of the day means the evening time. Question 65. Who buried Abraham and with whom was he buried? Well, his sons buried him, Isaac and Esau. So it was 25, verse 9. But basically, both his sons buried him. 25, verse 9. And his sons Isaac and Ishmael, buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar, the Hittite, which is before memory, the field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Hittite. There was Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. Question 66. What is similar between the sons of Ishmael and Jacob yet to be born? They're going to have 12 sons each, basically. The answer's there. What birth nationality was Abraham and Laban? They're Syrian. You see the answer in 25 verse 20. So they weren't born a Hebrew. I think we talked about the word Hebrew earlier on. Abraham became a Hebrew. Question 68. What color was Esau? Red. And I'll talk about that when I talk about the word man and Adam in the early questions up above. Question 69. What caused Isaac to go to Egypt? To whom had this happened before? And what similar thing did he do? Well, was a famine caused him to go to Egypt? To whom it happened to his father Abraham before, and he again called his wife his sister, similar to Abraham. Question 70. What did Esau do that displeased his parents? He married the foreign, called the foreigners or pagan people. So let's go to 26 verse 34. 26:34. And Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Bashemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite, which were a grief of mind unto Isaac and Rebekah. And then we go to 28 verse 9. 28 verse 9. Then went Esau unto Ishmael and took unto the wives which he had Manuela, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebajoth, to be his wife. And we saw later we're going to see laws. So you see Abraham, people practicing these laws before they were given to the nation of Israel later on. Question 71. To whom did Isaac speak, and what were they to do to get his blessing? We see the answer in 27 verse 4. And make me savory meat, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, that my soul may bless thee before I die. So Isaac was telling this to Esau, but this is Esau, but Jacob stole the blessing. If you read the story, you know his mother was a culprit there, or the mother was the one encouraging him to do that. To whom did Isaac speak? So he's to make him done that. So he's going past it. All right. Question 72. How was the blessing lost, and what's the difference between a father's blessing and a birthright? Right, so the first is the family name. So you carry the family name. And the second is you get a double portion of the blessing, which we see in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 7. So as the eldest, you're supposed to get a double portion, and you carry the family's name and so forth. As they read the verses in, where are we up to? Okay, in question 72. And I'll give you some Deuteronomy 21, 17, and some other places there. Question 73. What senses did Isaac use to identify who was to get his blessing? Well, because he was blind, he had to use the smell of the clothing. So you see his mother told Jacob to put on some of his brother's clothing to get smelling. And touch. He also got the hairs, the fur of some animal, put on the back of his neck and his arms, because that's where his dad's going to touch, and that's what fooled him. He knew the voice sounded differently, but he went by the senses he had, which was smell and touch. Question 74. What blessings, plural, did Isaac give, and to whom? I won't read all that out. You can see the chapters 27, verses 28 to 29, and verses 37 to 39, the long worded ones. So I'll save the time here. Question 75. To whom did Rebekah send Jacob? Who was that person and why? So let me ask that first. She sent him to her brother Laban. Yeah, and that's who he was. He was her brother Laban, and why? And it was to escape Esau trying to take revenge for the trickery that's played on him. What parting instructions did Isaac give Jacob? Let's go to 28 verses 4. And give thee the blessings of Abraham to thee and to thy seed with thee, that thou mayest inherit the land. So you've got to read the whole thing. So I won't read the whole thing. Yeah, but just read a blessing. Question 75. Who spoke to Jacob after leaving his family and before arriving at his destination, which was going to Laban? What vow did he make to that person? I covered this in the introduction to this thing about the seed. Again, you can read it 28 verses 13 plus and verses 20 plus. So it's too long to read. You read that for yourself. Question 77. Where did Jacob meet Esau? You see, it's by the well. It's generally the women's daughters, whatever, to go to the well to water the sheep. 78. What did Jacob desire of Laban? Laban, what did he propose? And what was Laban's reply? Now, what did Jacob desire? He desired to marry, or the youngest daughter of Laban. What did he propose? He proposed to work for 7 years. And Laban's reply, which I think needs some explanation here, because people think Laban did wrong. And I'm going to explain why I don't think people should read into the Bible there. So 29 verse 18. 29 verse 18. Try and be with me for this one. And Jacob loved Rachel and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel thy younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to thee than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. That's what he says. And in verse 20, and Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him like 3 days. So Laban didn't say yes or no. All he said is, hang around in our terms. Wait. Now just do your job and hang around, and we will see. And some people say that he was being deceitful. No. Laban doesn't know what's going to happen in 7 years. Anything could have happened. As a father, as the custom is, the eldest daughter is supposed to should be married first. So his concern is to get Leah first and then Rachel next. If Leah had gone within the first 7 years, we wouldn't be reading the story, what the next bit of the story. Yes, because Laban would have got his first daughter and his second daughter married. Yes, but because the first daughter didn't go, that is why the rest of the story comes about. All Laban said was, wait here, hang around, let's see, how it goes. Yes. So that's I think that's an important point that we should bear in mind. Yes, right. So imagine you have 2 things to sell. One is little value and one's a lot of value. And the only way to sell the little value thing is to put it with the bigger thing. So you get rid of both of them. Yes, at the same time. If you sell if someone comes and makes you offer for the expensive one and take the expensive one, you're never going to sell the cheap one. Yes, or get rid of the cheap one. So your only way of getting the cheap one to go is to come as a package. So that was the way Laban went about it. Yes, if someone had come and bought the cheaper one, fine, that would have gone. Then he can easily sell the expensive one to whoever comes to next customer. There's always a big demand for the nice expensive one. Okay, so anyway, I hope you get my point. Laban was doing his father's job, and so forth. Okay, question 79. How did Jacob make Leah his wife, and who was at the celebration? Right, so let me read this, chapter 29, verses 21. Right, 29, 21. And Jacob said unto Laban, so after he'd done this 7 years, yes, give me my woman. We heard before, woman and wife's the same thing. For my days are fulfilled. And fulfilled doesn't mean to change. It means I've accomplished what I said I was going to do. I did it. Fulfilled doesn't mean to change or cancel, or people read New Testament. When you say he's fulfilled the law, there was a law says he's going to come and riding a donkey, and oldest and died 2 thieves. That's what is fulfilled. Anyway, and Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. So that was it. It was the men he gathered together. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah, his daughter, and let me just skip that one. So basically, the father Laban gave the daughter Leah to Jacob, and he took Jacob into the tent, and that is how. There's no priest, there's no church, there's no nothing. And that's probably where the custom today comes in churches, where the father gives away the bride. So if I answer that question fully, how did Jacob make Leah his wife? I've done that. And who was it? So I've done that. Okay, so now in the New Testament, people confuse, and you can follow these other verses I've got here, Genesis chapter 2:21 and so forth there. People get confused with the word wedding when Yeshua turned the water into wine at the wedding. The wedding was not in a church wedding, and there was no priest around. Yes, we know. They were just at a celebration. Mary, Yeshua's mother, told him about it. They ran out of wine, and he turned water into wine. So it's what we call today the reception, the party, and people do the dancing and that kind of stuff. So that's what the wedding is. Yes, and this is exactly what Laban did. He took the men. He was great. He's doing a celebration with the men, having a little drink and so forth. And then they husband and wife, or man and woman, went off, and that was it. Yes, so do not get confused with weddings in your understanding when you hear the word, because of our culture and the biblical wedding. Yes, especially the word wedding in the New Testament. There's no piece of paper, no pastor, no church. Question 80. Why did Laban give Jacob Leah instead? Okay, I just explained that one, because Leah hadn't gone yet, and that's the custom. Question 81. How many sons did each wife have, and in what order? How did she come to conceive? Right. Again, you can read all. It's a long story. There's long names here. But the maids, the first maid had 6 sons, and then you can see the battle between the 2 sisters, Leah and Rebecca, trying to get what should I say? I won't say love by Jacob, but anyway, you read the story, and trying to please him and get more favor from the other sister, and so on and so forth. Question 82. What bargain did Rachel make with Leah regarding Reuben? That is in chapter 30, verse 14. I'll read for you. And Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them unto his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, give me, I pray thee, for my son's mandrake. And you can read the story. Now, a mandrake is like a flower of plant that has a root on it. So I'm not sure if it's talking about the flower, the whole thing, the root and the flower, or just the flowers, or just the root part. Yeah, three things. There's a basket of those things that we suppose has some value to them of some sort. They give you a smell, and that's the story. It was the mandrakes. The answer to the question is the mandrakes, and so forth. Question 75. Who spoke to Jacob after leaving his family and before arriving at it? I've done that one. So I must be, how did Rachel regarding Reuben? How many sons are that? Right, 82? Is that where I'm up to? What bargain? Right, 80. I've got 2 82s here. Right. I'm going to call this 82B before we come to do the questions. And 82A. Okay, so 82A. What bargain did Rachel make with Reuben? I've done that one. How did Jacob increase his flock over Laban? I'm going to read a story. He kind of cheated him with his flock. So have a read that story. Yes. So question 84. Why did Jacob leave Laban? Because let's read it. Let me read it. It's chapter 31, verses 1 to 3. And he said, sorry. And he heard the words of Laban, this is Jacob, Laban's sons, sorry. And he heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob hath taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's have he gotten, and all this glory. And Jacob beheld the countenance, in other words, the appearance, the behavior of Laban, and behold, it was not towards him as before. In other words, the bit of anger and a bit of jealousy and whatever it is, yes? Yeah, it's changed. Verse 3, and Yahweh said unto Jacob, return unto the land of thy fathers, and to thy kindred, and I will be with thee. So it's God who told him to go. Bear that in mind. He didn't just decide to cheat and go. Where are we up to? Right, why did you do it? Question 85. How many times did Jacob say Laban changed his wages, and over what period? 3 times, and over a long period. I think this reads 31:41. 31:41. 31:41. Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. There's your answer. Right, on to question 86. What was stolen from Laban by one of his daughters? How did she stop him finding it? Well, she stole his gods. So I just brought this out to show you that they were pagan worshippers, idol worshippers. All these group of people that Jacob got were Gentile, pagan, idol worshippers. Nothing special, but God changed them into the nation of Israel. Is my point with this question. We can read a story how she did. She pretended she was on her period. She sat in the basket where she hid in, and it wasn't found. Question 87. How many groups did Jacob divide the people with him in preparation to meet Esau, and what other precaution did he take? Well, he divided them into 2 groups so that if Esau killed one group, the other group would escape. And he sent lots of gifts and things with his servants. The answer is in chapter 32:7 and verse 13 and 20. Question 88. How was Jacob's name changed? He wrestled with God. Let's do 32:28. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and has prevailed. So as Jacob wrestled with God, and thus the outcome, name was changed. 89, question 89. What did Esau do when he first met Jacob? He kissed him on the cheek and was happy, and so on and so forth. Now here we see, although Esau was cheated out of his birthright and the blessing, he still got his birthright. As he inherited, we presume, everything from his father. Yes. So when he came with this multitude of riches, and he says to Jacob, I don't need your gifts, I have enough. Yes, he inherited everything because Jacob wasn't there to share it. So it's really what God wanted was to change the lineage with the seed. We talked about the seed in the introduction to the study, not so much the monetary stuff value. God can always give monetary value, as he did in this case via Laban. Question 90. In what land did Jacob settle after leaving Esau? He basically went back to his other place. 33:18. And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Paddan-aram, and pitched his tent before the city. So this Canaan land we've come up against with Abraham, and it's going to be the central part of the Old Testament. Question 91. Who is claimed to have been defiled? By whom? and what was the request to rectify the situation. If you go to chapter 34, it was Dinah was defiled by Shechem, and he wanted to rectify it by marrying her. Now, people would say, even the Bible says Dinah was raped, but it doesn't say that she protested or anything like that. We are just told she was raped. Yes, but if you read it, there's no actually indication that she cried out. I mean, she could have gone back to her father, as the law, you see later in the law, and cried out, "This man has done such and such to me." And in any case, I say Shechem he did love her and wanted to make it right. But Levi and his brother went and killed all the men and took all the goods. So even so, Israel, so the group multiplied again, not just the servants he got from Laban, but he took on these other Gentile people as well, and they all become the nation of Israel later on. Which of Jacob's sons took revenge on the sister, and how? Again, you read chapter 34, verses 26 to 29. You will see. I'll just read it for you. And they Simeon and Levi, you see that in verse 25 actually. Have I got 25 there? Right, yes, okay, 25 is where your answer is, 25 to 29. Question 93. What did Jacob's household and others give him which he hid under oak tree? 35 verse 4. And he gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and all their earrings which were in the ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak tree which was in Shechem. So I told you, see, they were idol worshippers, yeah, but they changed, they eventually become the nation of Israel. Question 94. Who buried Isaac? Well, the same way Abraham was buried by his two sons, the same way in 35:29, we see he also remarried his two sons. It says, and Isaac gave up the ghost and died, and was gathered unto his people, being old and full of days, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. Next question. So basically, you see the sons of marrying the fight, even though they may go off, they still come back to do bury service. What is Esau's generation called? They call it the Ishmaelites, Genesis 31, or sorry, they call Edomites, Genesis 36, verse 1. Question 96. Why did Esau depart out of Canaan? Go to verse 7, 36, verse 7. For their riches were more than that which might dwell together, and the land wherein they were strangers could not bear them because of the cattle. Same as Lot and Abraham. So I see a lot of repetition here, calling your sister, your wife, your sister, and famine and so forth. Question 97. Who was the youngest son of Jacob, and how old were they when they had the dreams? In 37 verse 2, we know the youngest. See, these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, and with the sons of Ziphlah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father. So now, in the beginning, I told you the word woman, wife, and concubine is the same. One scripture, if you look at my other studies on Judges, I think I remember the story in Judges on the YouTube channel, forward to one word, and then Yahweh. It goes into the book of Judges and talks about concubine. It shows you how it's the same word. So here we see Bilhah, one time she's called a concubine, here she's called a wife. So it's to show you, it's this, even if you don't get the Hebrew, if you put line upon line, you see it's the same thing. Woman, wife, concubine are the same. Question 98. Question 98. How many of their dreams are told? How many of their dreams are told to their family? Let's go to 37 verse 9. And you see, it should be, and he dreamed yet another dream and told it his brethren and said, behold, I have dreamt a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars, and so forth. Yes. So I think this is the second dream that he had. But this is dreams. He says he had many dreams, but we only know of 2 of them being told to the family. Question 99. What did the other brothers plan to do to him? Answers in 37:20 to, yes, you read it right there. Come therefore and let us slay him and cast him into some pit. Question 100. Which brother saved him from death and which suggested he instead be sold, and to whom? Again, read 37 verse 21, and you see it was Reuben, and he said, if you read 26 to 27, he says, and Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hands be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. Question 101. What impression did they give Jacob of what had happened to the youngest? I use the word impression because they pretended to the father that he was killed by an animal. They took his coat, put in some blood, took it to the father. The father recognized the coat and saw blood in it, and he is the father who said he's been slain. So they didn't say it, just that's the impression they give. Well, hence they use the word impression. Question 102. How many sons did Judah have with his Canaanite wife? And what was the name of his first wife? That is question 102. You see the answer in chapter 38, verses 5 and 6. I'll read it out to you. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar. Is there another part of the question? All right. Another part of the question. How many sons? Anyway, he had 3 sons. Read the story. He had 3 sons, and the wife was called Tamar. Question 103. Why did God kill his second son? 38 verse 9. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, and it came to pass when he went in unto his brother's wife that he spilt it on the ground, lest that he should give seed unto his brother. And 10, and the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him. So we talked about Job's daughters earlier on, trying to preserve seed for Job's name because they thought there was no men left. That's why I said they didn't do it for selfish, lustful reasons. They did it to try and keep the name going. So you see the ways of God that these daughters knew was there from before. And we see it again repeated here in Genesis 38 with this story here. And then we can later and see, so this is actually become, God puts as a law. If a brother dies in battle, for example, or dies for regardless, then the surviving brother takes the widow to look after her and be a wife and raise up seed for her. And again, we see it again in the story of Ruth and Boaz. Question 104. What pledge of security did Judah give? What pledge of security to give his daughter-in-law? Verse 38:18. You know the story. Judah didn't do what he should to give the younger son to be her husband when he became old. So she had to go about a long way about it, pretend she was harlot and so forth. So the answer to the question is in verse 18, which reads, and she said, what pledge shall I give thee? And she said, thy signet, which is the ring, and thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thy hand. And he gave it to her and came unto her, and she conceived a child by him. And you read the story, story. So these questions are mainly for you to remember the story and remember the principles about preserving someone's name. And so when it comes to the laws, you see that there's nothing new that Israel's getting. Yes, God is just reminding them of it because they've been in Israel for 430 years. They forgot the ways of their fathers. What punishment did Judah proclaim for his daughter-in-law? 38 verse 24. They proclaimed she was to be burnt. And again, this is not stoned. There's a difference between burnt and stoned. This is because she was a part of the Levite lineage, Judah. So the Judah priestly line. And with priests or priests' wives who commit whoredom, they are burnt. You see this in Leviticus chapter 21, verses 9, and also look up Deuteronomy 22, verse 21. There's a difference between the treatment of ordinary or other women of the other tribes and who commit harlotry or adultery, and the ones of the Levite, the kind of priestly line. Next question, 106. What was special about the daughter-in-law? What was special about the daughter-in-law's son? 38 verse 27. And it came to pass in the time of her travel that behold, twins were born in the womb. So this is the second set of twins. And then we have Esau and Jacob, if I remember rightly. Okay, question 107. What request did Joseph's master's wife require of him? Basically, that he slept with her. The answer is 39 verse 7. Question 108. What nationality did the wife call Joseph? In 39 verse 14, you see it's a Hebrew, same as Abraham. So I said the word Hebrew passed down the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, not to Ishmael or Esau or any of the other children. Question 109. What punishment did Joseph's master do to him? They put him in prison, and you know the story about the dreams he had. Question 110. After managing Potiphar's affairs, what was Joseph's next authority position? He was made a kind of head in the prison guard, not head, but he's given authority, some authority there. Have a read of it. Question 111. Is there a difference between interpret and translate? And if so, what is it? Yes, there definitely is. If you go to chapter 40, verses 8 and 18, you see interpret is really to explain the meaning of something that you're told about. Whereas translate, so here in one language and translate in another language, i.e. from French to English or English to Spanish, whatever, yeah? Translate it so someone who can't speak the language can understand it in their own language. Interpret, you read a story, the baker and the butler, they both told a story and everyone understood the story, but not everyone can interpret what it means. And we see the same way when the king had his dream, all the magicians heard the story, but they couldn't interpret to explain what it means. I always use the example of a driver. A driver knows road signs, something, a T-junction, an incline coming up, a roundabout, or whatever it is. Yes, they know it. Yes, non-drivers may not know what the sign means. They can see it's a triangle, or they can see it's a T, but they don't know what that T stands for or what the triangle stands for. Yes, there's a difference between interpret and translate. So when you come to New Testament, if you don't gather these principles in Genesis, you think that in Acts chapter 2, that there's a translation going on. Yes, there's no translation going on. The apostles, Peter especially, spoke in one language, and everybody heard it in their own language. Yeah, they didn't need an interpreter or a translator. Yes, anyway, big difference between and you see a whole Pentecostal denomination has been born because of a misunderstanding of Acts chapter 2, interpret. All right, question 112. How many years famine was there and how was it known? Well, 7 years. I'll let you read chapters 41, verses 1 and 26. What were the names of Joseph's sons and who was his wife's father? The sons was Manasseh. You read this in 41 verses 45. Manasseh and Ephraim. and his wife was the daughter of a priest, a pagan priest, I call it Egyptian priest. So even, so it's not the fact that, I say, you marry a foreigner so much, although God says not to do it, but it's Joseph didn't ask for her. Pharaoh gave him to her as a reward for his interpretation of the dreams. But even so, Joseph wasn't led away from God as a result, like as Solomon was. Even Ruth, who was a pagan woman, didn't lead the men away. In fact, she came to the faith, the same as Tamar came to the faith. But in Deuteronomy chapter 13, we'll see God says it's all about if they lead you away from him. Question 114, how many of Joseph's brothers go to Egypt? Well, it was 10 of them, because Joseph was a brother. So there's 12 of them in total. One stayed behind, and the other 10 went. We read chapter 42, verse 2 to 3. So how many of his brothers go to Egypt? Why? Oh, because of famine. And why did Joseph's brothers not recognize him? Now, if you read it, you see he had particularly made himself not recognizable. Some people come up with a theology and a whole belief system. He was black because Egyptians were black, therefore didn't recognize because no. You cannot go with who's living in the country today, say 21st century, or even 200 years ago, and say the same people were living there 4,000 years ago. People change. Look at Australia, look at America. Many, even in the last 300 years, 400 years, populations have changed, much less than 4,000 years. You note, if you read the story, you see Joseph deliberately made himself strange. He understood what they're saying, but he pretended he didn't. He spoke through a translator. Although in your Bible it says use the word interpreter, but it's translator, and so on. Yes, and the more, in fact, they thought he was dead. They had no way of even suspecting that this was this person, especially their brother becoming the second in command in Egypt. So for all those reasons, it has nothing to do with his color. Where am I up to? What was Joseph's brother? All right, question 115. What did the brothers find in their sacks when they returned to Jacob's place? They found the money that they took to buy the food. They found it back in their sacks. Chapter 43. Why did the Egyptians not sit to eat with Joseph's brothers? Because it's an abomination to do that. So Joseph sat on his own because he was second in command or had a high ranking. He didn't even sit with other Egyptians because it's an abomination to do that. And neither did the Egyptian servants, say Joseph's servants, sit with the Hebrew brothers, because again, if you read it, let me actually read it, for example. Is it 43:32? 43:32. And they set for him, that's the servants setting for Joseph by himself, because of his authority, and for them by themselves, that's the servants of the Egyptians, of Joseph as Egyptian, and for the, and for the Egyptians, which did eat with him. So yeah, there's also three groups by themselves, because the Egyptians might not eat bread with the Hebrews, for that is an abomination unto the Egyptians. So the separation of God's people from pagan people, it happens on both sides. Let me give you, I think of some examples. And we're going to see in the New Testament, the whole book of Acts chapter 10, they call Cornelius and Peter, is not, that's why Peter thought when he had this vision on a rooftop, he didn't think it's for him to go to the foreigners, the Gentiles, because it was custom not to do it. But God has to tell him, no, it's nothing, firstly, nothing to do with food. Some people think the dreams to do with what to eat and what not to eat. No, because God's now saying, I'm now going to accept others into my salvation system, give them reward. Yes. Remember, Jesus did say that they have to wait in an upper room and they'd be witness to him, throughout the world, basically, yeah, or the different nations. And then later, we also read in the New Testament in regards to Paul, when Paul goes around tries to teach, spreading the message in different nations, some of the natural Gentiles were accusing him of trying to convert them, or sort of teaching things which it wasn't lawful for a Roman to hear. I can't remember the verse, but anyway, once you see the principle in Genesis, you then be able to pick it up when it comes later on in the Bible. And that also goes to change the names. The reason why God changed names from Abraham to Abraham and Sarah to Sarah, and Daniel's names were changed to Abednego and so forth, because, and yes, when they go into Egypt in Exodus, they stay in Goshen on their own, not the Egyptians. All of these things, because that's a system. The two systems do not mix, the devil's representatives and God's representatives, because no one wants to risk their people being converted or snared. And sadly, that's what happened to Israel. They went against God's laws and they were snared, and they was problems. Anyway, so the answer to your question, that question 116, is chapter 43, verse 32. And the last question for this video, question 117, what was Joseph's brothers accused of stealing, and with whom was it found? It was, they said they accused of stealing his cup. The cup, he says he did divination, so he pretended to be one of the pagan people, Egyptians, that he does divination or soothsaying, there was kind of spiritualist things, but it's really a trick to get them back and bring the brother and the family, story. So the same way he was thrown into the pit and it turned out to be the work of God, the same way all of this is, they're going to find out at the end of the book of Genesis, is all the work of God, to show you how the nation of Israel was created from Adam and Eve, through Noah, through Abraham, and then nation of Israel created. Once a nation is created, the rest of the Bible will then be about them. Okay, I shall carry on the rest of this video, revision of Genesis, in part 2. Shalom. Hope you've learned some things.